James, a thing that I wanted to discuss with you in particular, because I know you know who I'm talking about, and you know some of the players involved. Chance Rencounter scheduled for a fight this weekend, originally set to fight Randy Brown, not of Chicago Bulls fame. Dwight Grant replaces Randy Brown. Now, when Randy Brown was out, there were a lot of calls, especially from the man himself. Chris Curtis, 19-5, won on Dana White's Contender Series. Did so in impressive fashion with a hook kick and injured himself in the time being. Retired briefly out of frustration, but has had fights scheduled for December and January. Both of them fell out, not with the UFC. He has offered himself up in several late notice situations, and for whatever reason has been rejected. No reason given to him, no reason given from the UFC. Because if you're in that situation, the UFC is not going to talk about you. Well, that fight falls out, and Dwight Grant isn't able to fight either. Instead, it's Kyle Stewart. So had Chris Curtis been booked on this show just to face Chance Rencounter in general, I'd have been like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. 19-5, he's won a bunch of fights in a row. I mean, he's a mainstay at CES. What's the deal? I mean, obviously, he's not blackballed to some extreme degree, or he wouldn't have been on Dana White's Contender Series. But why can't this guy get a fight in the UFC?
I don't know. I think that I know if Sean Shelby doesn't like someone, he doesn't like someone, or Mick Maynard or whoever. I mean, we've seen cases like this. Like Shorty Torres was a guy, he eventually got to the UFC, but for whatever reason, they didn't like him. The fact that they gave up on him so quickly after one loss, I think shows that. I know the flyweight division they're trying to get rid of it, but nonetheless, he was just never treated well in the UFC. Chris Curtis is just one of those cases. I think the only thing I can point to is that he's a little bit older. And that might be, they're not usually as willing to sign guys like that. The guy that did get the fight, Kyle Stewart, I want to say he's in, let me just find out how old he is. I believe he's, less, he's under, he's 29. So I guess he's not 31. That far off from Chris. Yeah. Chris, I think, is what, 33, I think?
He's 31.
30, okay, well, then there you go. So I don't know. He must have done something or said something or done something, I don't know, that got the matchmakers upset, but I agree. And it's also, I think, proximity as well. Although saying that, Stewart's from lives in Phoenix, so it's not like that's like a close, plane ride to Brooklyn or anything. So I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. I just think he's one of those guys for some reason that has been on a sort of a blackball list. Like another example too is James Nakashima, who's the LFA champion. He kept fighting to a decision. It seemed like the UFC just wasn't thrilled about that, even though he was beating everyone, including Kyle Stewart, who's making his debut this weekend. So James is like, you know what? Screw this. I'm going to one championship, and he did, and he's probably getting paid good money. So I think the UFC is just a little bit weird when it comes to signing certain fighters.
Yeah, that's one of the things that particularly confused me about the Chris Curtis thing, and we'll talk to Joe about this as well. But Chris Curtis on the Contender Series had a great showing, had a great finish. His last 10 fights, he's got one loss, and it's to Nishan Burrell, who is a UFC Strikeforce Bellator veteran.
And that was a fight that, I don't know if you saw that fight, that Chris should have won that fight. That was a bad decision.
Yeah. Now, while his Bellator run doesn't exactly prove our point, and he's in his late 30s, we've seen this with Gerald Harris as well, a guy who is very clearly UFC caliber, could never get that call, never did get that call again because of one fight. Chris Curtis never had that. He never had the benefit of a run. Joe, I really thought that type of thing was going to be out the window, maybe when Joe Silva left, but it's not. It's still there.
No, I would argue to say that Joe Silva was a bit more lenient than Sean Shelby, and Maynard is a Sean Shelby protege by all accounts. So you're talking about whenever in doubt, think about what's happening behind the scenes. Very simple. Whenever there's a doubt, think about what's happening behind the scenes. And unfortunately, it's a game of when you're dealing with matchmakers in general, even not just with the UFC, but in general, it can get into a situation where I'm the man. I will decide who fights here. You won't. You play the game, and when I'm ready, I will call you and watch your mouth. Right?
Yeah.
And whether you do something publicly or push back behind the scenes, you got to be careful. And it's one of those things that's happened to other fighters that have left the organization or left the promotion, where it's like they don't want to deal with that with the matchmakers there, right? And I don't blame them. Unfortunately, when you're at the top of the heap, when you're the king of the mountain, You got to play the game sometimes, and it sucks. You know, and I'm not asking anyone to be a company man or a company woman, but sometimes you got to play that game, and then, you know, or you better have something else in that fire. That's all I'm saying.